It's a pleasure to be here. Hi, I'm Liz Ripley. I am with Iowa Learning Farms as a conservation and cover crop outreach specialist. And I'm really excited today to have you all join us for this no-till as a moisture management tool virtual field day. I just want to give a quick shout out and thank you to all of those that have attended our previous field days and provided feedback via our evaluation process. By being in the field with these speakers, specifically Doug today, they're able to address and identify items that they may not when they're looking at still images and say a PowerPoint presentation. So that's why we do like to utilize these field recorded videos that are also available as standalone videos on our YouTube channel following each live virtual event. A little bit about the Iowa Learning Farms. We were established in 2004. Our goal is to build a culture of conservation by working with farmers and researchers to implement practices that improve water quality and soil health while remaining profitable. And these events and our outreach efforts are all made possible due to our great partnerships with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Iowa Department of Natural Resources, US EPA Section 319, Conservation Districts of Iowa, the Iowa Farm Bureau, Practical Farmers of Iowa, GrowMark, Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, Iowa Corn, and the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. So just a quick reminder that while the video is playing and our speakers are presenting, please do keep yourself muted. However, once they are done, we will invite you to submit your questions either via the chat box or simply unmute to ask them live of our presenters. We encourage that dialogue and conversation. After today's event, you will be receiving an email evaluation. It's very, very quick. We ask that you return that, and if you do, we will, if you request it, send you a free Iowa Learning Farms neck gaiter that can be used as a mask as you're out and about in the communities. So this field day is just the start of the conversation. It's an exchanging of ideas. It's important to then network with your fellow farmers and landowners, technical specialists, and again, please return that evaluation so we can continue to improve our future offerings, topics, and tools that we're using. So I'd like to thank both of our presenters today. We have Doug Gronau. He's a Crawford County Farmer who will be featured in our video and available to take some questions here later in the program. And we also have Jodi DeJong-Hughes with the University of Minnesota as a Regional Extension Educator. So again, please remain muted during the video portion, and then we will open it up for for questions, which you can submit via the chat box or as unmuted.
I'm Doug Gronau, farm in Crawford County, just outside of Vail, which is about 85 miles straight west of Ames, and farm with my son, and my wife helps out too. And right now we're farming about 1,000 acres, and I'm Doug Gronau, farm in Crawford County, just outside of Vail, which is about 85 miles straight west of Ames, and farm with my son, and my wife helps out too. And right now we're farming about 1,000 acres, and we've been no-till since 2006, and been using cover crops since 2014. Really, it all started back in the 60s and 70s. My dad knew there was a better way than plowing, and he actually started no-till using a old Buffalo machine. And he had pretty good luck with that. The only trouble was there wasn't any weed control to speak of, and the planter units were very questionable, and he was having a lot of trouble with them, and there was no seed monitors or anything else. So he ended up going to a plateless planter, but one thing I did learn from that, I knew no-till would work. And as things happened, I knew At some point when I changed equipment, that's the way I was going to go. We made that switch in 2006. When I made the decision to go no-till, I really didn't take the advice of a lot of folks that said just do it a little bit at a time. We just decided to go, and all our acres, and we would make it work. And that's how we did it. We started out with a Kinsey planter with kind of a Martin till system on that, and which was basically a coulter, row cleaners, spike packer wheels and drag chains. And as time went along, we ended up with a case planter, and when we actually started using floating row cleaners on that. And we've got a 16 row split row planter, 1631 for soybeans, and it works pretty well. We've got a row cleaner on every row, and they're a very narrow line, and believe it or not, we can go right into standing corn stalks and plant. Our goal was to have a better seed bed than we were using with just the coulters, and that's worked out pretty well. I stuck with no-till for several different reasons. Number one, I knew it would work. I knew it would take a little time to really get the soil stabilized, and which it has. And again, there were equipment savings and labor savings, and eventually I knew it would be a real good soil building and soil saving technique. Some of the tips that I think I've learned, don't necessarily do what I did and go whole hog into no-till right away. You might want to start small, but I think the number one thing is to keep your expectations low, because especially in soybeans, and especially with 15-inch soybeans, the soybeans look terrible until they have actually gotten bigger than the corn stalks. And in 15-inch, you can't even hardly see them until they're 6 or 8 inches high. It's not like 30-inch row beans that kind of crowd each other and grow taller. So if looking down a nice, neat row is really your thing, maybe you should question or change your mindset before you go to no-till, because even though the tops don't necessarily look like they're there, the roots are growing, and that's the most important thing. Corn is very similar in that regard. You just can't hardly see that corn, and you think there's something wrong with it, and you go out there and look at it, and it looks good. But when you're looking at that bean stubble and the corn coming up through it, you really can't hardly see it until the stuff is knee-high almost. So again, keep your expectations low from a visual standpoint. Just remember that the roots are growing, and even though the crop may seem to be behind a little bit, it's really not. A lot of folks are up in years, they're fixing their equipment, but I think as younger folks come along, and you just have to keep bringing out the advantages of no-till. And you know, a lot of the problem too is landlords. They like to see nice crops growing in their fields. And when I first started farming, one gentleman, I said, well, we're no-till. And I said, it's not going to look too pretty to start with. He says, well, that's okay. And after the first 6-inch rain that came in about 2 hours, the neighbor's field had completely washed down to basically the plow pan, big gullies. The county had to come out and dig corn stalks out of a box culvert and all over the highway, and there wasn't a problem in the no-tilled field, just right catty corner across the intersection. And that kind of sold him on no-till. And it's those kind of advantages you really have to point out. And landlords, you know, they want to take care of their land, and really it's no-till is a good way to do that, to have your tenant practice that. We have done a lot of other conservation practices because we're in relatively hilly territory, slopes up to 12, 13%, you know, and if you want to do a corn bean rotation, you definitely need to have other measures there. And when we started, terraces were the only thing to really put in that we could do. So my farm is actually completely terraced now, and we've just kind of finishing up a little bit, maybe shorter terraces and spots. We still use them. We've done a lot of waterways. I think waterways do help catch a lot of sediment and help increase the water quality from running off. I think the no-till cover crops are also extremely important. No-till, you get a lot of infiltration with no-till that people don't realize. And when some of the neighbors have a lot of runoff, we don't hardly have any runoff because the infiltration of our soil is so good. We have saved a lot of soil. Of course, terraces do that. They catch the soil. Waterways do that. But, you know, when you can save that soil right in place where it's at, over time, your organic matter increases, and we've noticed that. When I first started farming, we were 1.8 to 2.4 organic matter, and now we're between 3 and 4, and that's going primarily with a corn bean rotation. And they say, well, you really can't build organic matter with a corn bean rotation. Well, you can if you're using cover crops and no-till. We did change a little bit some of our equipment. In 2012, we got this planter. It's a 1631 planter. We added narrow row cleaners on it. Work very well. They're floating. In corn, they work the best. Corn stalks go into beans. In soybean stubble, they actually, even though they're floating, they actually remove just a little too much soil. We did add starter fertilizer with some tubes that go right down in here, and it's an air down pressure system. And we found in planting corn that the depth control wasn't really the best. There wasn't quite enough down pressure. And we knew what we wanted to do, but it was really impractical to try and update this planter, so we bought another planter. Even though it works quite well for soybeans, and that's why we really didn't want to get rid of it. Last summer, my son and I found this planter. It's a 24 row. We really didn't want a 24 row, but I think it had the equipment on it that we were really looking for, and the price was right. We ended up getting it. It's got row cleaners on it, of course, but the row cleaners are air adjustable, which means that when we're out planting in bean ground, my son can adjust them so that they're just barely hitting the ground rather than kind of plowing a path. And I think that's really better for soil quality and better for stand and everything else. The planter units are just the same pretty much as the other one. It does have starter fertilizer on it, and it's a little bit different because it's in the shoe of the planter, and it actually puts the starter fertilizer underneath the seed instead of on top of the seed. And I think that might be an advantage. It also came with these spiked row fertile closers, and the wheel here is the same. But one thing it does have pressure, automatic pressure, down pressure, automatic hydraulic down pressure, and it keeps your depth the same all over the field. And that has really been a lifesaver this year because it was so dry we went to 2.5 inches, and I've never had corn come up as even and as at the same depth, all emerge the same time, and I think that in itself is going to be very helpful. Also, we've got all electric planting units, which helps with the spacing. So I'm really happy we got this planter, even though it's fairly large for our area. It really does the job. 3 years ago, my son and I made the decision to hire a professional crop consultant, and I think it's turned out to be a really, really good investment. Even though there's that cost, you do get the crop scouting part, but you also get really, really good analysis and suggestions on how to improve what you're doing. One of the things that they do is prescription planning, and by that I mean is a variable rate planning. And really, one other person, when I was thinking about signing up for this, encouraged me to do it. And the reason is, on the poor ground now, especially in corn, they would reduce the population, and by doing that, the corn was able to, if you plant a flexible eared variety, the corn was able to produce a very good-sized ear. And then in those areas that are really, really high yielding, they would increase the population. And kind of the result was overall increased yields. And it's just amazing in those poor areas to see the yields come up just by reducing that population a couple, 3,000. The plant health was better, the standability was better, and again, the yield was good. We do the same thing on soybeans. It's just the reverse in the poorer areas. They're upping the population a little bit, and I think they're right at about 145,000 now in 15-inch rows. In the better areas, they're reducing the population, getting down to about 120,000 seeds per acre. And so far, it's worked very well, and the more yield information you have, the more they can fine-tune what you're doing. We also, several years ago through our co-op, went to variable rate fertilizer, especially with PK, and I think the big money saver on that was on lime, because there's no sense putting lime on places that really doesn't need it. So that's been a real good money saver, and we've continued with that. A lot of the experts always talked about increase in soil quality, and of course we saw the increase in organic matter. But when you go out and I checked, we hadn't had any rain for 3 weeks, went out in a pollinated cornfield, and not in the wheel track, which was a little hard, but right next to the wheel track, took a spade, went right in the ground between the rows, and 2 inches down, there was still pretty decent moisture. And this is after we hadn't had rain for 3 weeks. And I was getting a little concerned, but after I saw that moisture out there, I knew we were in pretty good shape and were able to be able to withstand some of the worst of the drought. And we did manage to catch a couple showers after that, so that made things a lot easier. My neighbor's crops might be ahead of me a little bit in the spring because the soils are a little cooler, I will say that, but just don't get excited. The roots are working, and the crop does catch up, and in the fall, I'm satisfied with the yields I'm getting for the rainfall we've got, and I'm going to keep doing that. One other thing about soil quality, as I dug this little moisture sample, the soil was exactly like they said it would be. It was crumbly. It was just like you see on pictures. And to have clay soil that was really abused when I came here, to have it in that kind of condition, I think that was pleasing to me. We've also done a Haney test, and on some of my rougher ground, and the organic matters, even on that ground, had come up quite a bit.
So at this point, Jodi's going to get her screen shared, and a reminder that following Jodi's presentation, you're welcome to unmute to ask your questions, or you can start entering those into the chat box, and I'll hold those until the end of Jodi's presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Jodi.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, is it showing the right way now?
We're back to the presenter view.
Oh, didn't I do? Okay. Now?
That is correct.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Jodi DeJong-Hughes and I'm out of Wilmer, but right now I'm out of my office and my home, as everybody is. And I have 15 minutes to kind of talk about tillage and soil water management, which you might have more questions than answers by the end of it, but I'm here to answer them if you need to. First thing off, our hearts in Minnesota definitely go out to you guys in Iowa who had the derecho go through and just obliterate your corn and grain bins and trees. And yeah, all of us up here have just been in horror about it. And so I really hope everything works out for you guys. You're going to have a lot of different things to think about this fall. So on a different note, let's talk about soil structure. And Doug was saying that, you know, he saw better soil structure out in his field, and everything he was saying was just really, really interesting to hear. It's things that we do know about, and we've got research on it, and I've seen it at plenty of fields. And so it's great to see that it's working all over. So I try to help farmers increase their soil structure, because soil structure is everything to me. It really helps the physical, the chemical, and the biological side of the soil. You know it's working for you if you see soil structure. And the reason why I like soil structure so much is the picture on the left is showing one that had been moldboard plowed for quite a few years in a row. And so it's kind of the worst situation out there for your soil. And you can see there on the left-hand side that the roots are having a terrible time trying to get through that soil, especially as it dries out. And if you see roots that are flattened or not a nice cylindrical, they're really having some problems. You can see the one root, I don't know if you can see my mouse, where it's turning around here. That means it is really spending a lot of energy trying to get through the soil. And it's basically a brick. You can also see there's a lot of small pore spaces. There's not a lot of places to hold water. Now, if you look over here, this is under grass. So this is the extreme on the other side. And in a cropped system, I usually see somewhere in between these two. So the one on the right, again, was in, it was in a grass field for a long time. But it shows you the nice parts about structure is that if it rains, you can see that it's going to get into the soil very, very quickly. There's a lot of large channels to help that water flow down quickly. But then there's a lot of smaller pore spaces too to hold on to water for later on in the season. So we don't want a homogeneous soil. I hear guys that when they're out there selling equipment, tillage equipment, they say, well, we really want to homogenize it, make it all the same. And honestly, roots do not want that. The picture on the left is homogenized. That's all small pore spaces. And the one on the right has large, medium, small, and that's what we're trying to get to. That's what the root wants. And that's what we're trying to satisfy. It's not the visual aspects or anything like that. It's what does the root need to grow the best to feed that plant. So when you get that kind of soil wet, if you took that picture on the left and you get it wet, then you're looking at, it turns into mush. And you can see all the water on the surface here. So if you're on a slope, all that water that can't make it into the soil is going to run down slope. The one on the right, this one, like again, is a bluegrass situation. There's a lot of pore spaces and you can see that that water made it through. On this, and we'll see if it works. Oh, good. Okay, so this side there on the left is mimicking residue in the soil or roots because they have a lighter bulk density than the soil around them. This one over here on the right is showing buried residue, like if you do tillage. Now they're dropping water into the middle and they're watching it and how it flows. As soon as it hits this area of lighter bulk density, it just zooms into the soil. And that's what residue is, especially standing stalks, is because they act like a straw. They just wick that water into the soil so quickly. And that's the great thing about no-till and strip-till is you have a lot of this there. Where on the other side, where you have the residue that's buried, it can actually be a barrier to the water getting down into the soil. And what does this mean? Well, it means that you can get out into your field a lot faster. So on the right side is a double disked field, and on the left side is strip till. And you can see because of that residue, it helps get the water into the soil very quickly. And here you can see it's still ponding. The storm had just left, it just had exited towards the right side. This is another reason why structure is very important. A lot of times you'll see your tractor sink or rut to the depth of your tillage. This is, and by the way, this is tracks and tires. I do a lot with soil compaction too, but this is what happens with soil structure. And if you don't think it's important, have me come out and do a soil pit in your field, and let's make the soil pit bigger than your tractor and see what happens next spring. So structure to me is the #1 thing that you can do out there for your field. And the main thing that ruins structure is tillage. The more aggressive that you go, the deeper you go, the more times that you're out there. That's why no-till is very quick at building soil structure or not breaking it down. So there are happy mediums. You know, if you can't go pure no-till, there are strip till or things like that. Or if you can just shallow up the tillage and don't go as many times, that would be very helpful too. Also stay away from discs and moldboard plows. The other thing is that microbes that help form structure with their hyphae, and they physically hold soil together with the sticky substance they give off, and also, like I said, their hyphae, they don't like tillage. That's not bacteria. Some bacteria really enjoy tillage. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, because it showed a Zoom page and not my slides. Can you see my slides now?
No, your slides went away, but we can see you.
Oh, that's weird. Okay.
Try sharing your screen again. Sorry, someone else
I will.
tried to share their screen.
Okay. And is it in presenter or regular?
It's in the correct mode.
Okay, then we'll keep going. So if you do tillage, you can see that you're physically going to, break apart the hyphae here. And that is very destructive to fungi and actinomycetes. They don't really like tillage very much. So that's another reason why if you have no-till that it helps build structure better, is because you're not playing with the biology down there. So another thing that's ARS and Morse, what they have is a little machine called Mr. GEM, and this is a mobile research gas emissions machine. And the plexiglass box up front here, what it does, you set it down right after you do tillage, and you seal it up around the edges, and it measures how much carbon dioxide and moisture are leaving that field because of tillage or whatever treatment you want to do to it. So it's kind of neat because you can't really, you can't see carbon. You can't see CO2 leaving the field, and losing a pound of carbon, you're kind of like, I don't know how big a pound of carbon is. And this measures it for us. So what this shows for carbon, and remember, our organic matter is about 50% carbon. So we want to keep carbon in the soil. And after 19 days of doing, MP is moldboard plow, DH is disc harrow, CP is chisel plow, and no-till. And what they show is that in 19 days, moldboard plow lost 3,800 pounds of CO2 as organic matter. And disc harrow did about half of that, same with chisel plow. And then no-till also had some loss, but that's kind of the natural breathing of the soil of carbon dioxide. Well, what does this mean? He put in a wheat crop, and because of the yield and what he had out there, that was 2,800 pounds of residue from the previous wheat crop as carbon, and he lost 1,000 pounds more than that due to the tillage he did with it. So, you know, you can do disc harrow and chisel plow and definitely no-till and keep that. Now, what happens if this bar is above what you're putting in? It's like a bank deposit. You'll start losing your organic matter content. Okay, the percent will keep going down. They also looked at the evaporation rate because of this. And in the 19 days with moldboard plow, this was 2 inches that they lost. Disc harrow lost 1.8, chisel plow 1.8, and no-till 1.4. So moldboard plow does lose more. And people say, well, Jodi, nobody does moldboard plow anymore. And it's like, well, you don't have to travel very far to actually see a moldboard plow, especially in Minnesota. We claim that our soils are so cold, we got to warm them up. And it's a really good way to increase your erosion, decrease your organic matter content, and cause a few other problems, and really make that homogeneous soil with very small pore spaces. This is another study that Don Rakowski did, and he's again from Morris in the ARS up in Morris, Minnesota. And they looked here that we have moldboard plow, we have a subsoiler, a mole knife, and no-till. And what we found is that moldboard plow had 5 times the evaporation rate than what no-till does. And we know that. And Doug was saying his soils are a little bit cooler. And I will agree with that on some years. So here's what we did. I worked with Aaron Day from NDSU, and we had 4 years of a tillage research trials at 3 locations. And we looked at the difference between vertical till, chisel plow, and 2 different types of strip till, one with a shank and one with coulters. And we also had some no-till right next to us. The farmers that we were working with, a couple of them were no-till. So we took some heat and moisture measurements all year round. That's what grad students are for. They go out there once a week and they take these measurements. And what we found is no-till, where you have all the heat on, or all the residue on top here, was about 42 degrees at the day of planting. Here, vertical till, where you're doing a little bit of tillage, mainly about 2 inches into the soil, chopping up the residue there, but incorporating some of it, was about 47 degrees. Chisel plow, which is going about 8 inches in this instance and incorporating quite a lot of the residue, was about 50 degrees. And then we had strip till, where you have the berm is clean and free of residue, but the residue is pushed to the side. And so under the berms is cool at 45 degrees, but this berm here was 51 degrees. And I'm going to show you a yield on some of this too, because temperature is very, very important, especially for corn, but it's not always everything. It depends on the year. And then here's the moisture content. This is at planting. So no-till had 32% moisture, vertical till 25%, chisel plow was warmer and drier at 19%, and so was the berm underneath strip till. And then underneath the residue of the strip till was 29%. So what it would do was feed that water to this area under the berm as the season went on. Well, but the main thing in Minnesota is, okay, if you don't warm up that soil and get it pretty black, you're going to lose yield. Residue equals loss of yield. So let's see on that. We've done 15 years of research just that I've been helping doing. There's been plenty of research before that, but the yields were lower. So people are saying, well, we're dealing with much higher yields now, more residue, cooler soils, you know, let's do it again. So in West Central Minnesota, we looked at a soybean field for 3 years in a row, and the red is the strip till, the yellow is the vertical till. Then there was a rotation of chisel plow with vertical till, depending if you're using corn or beans. And then we did his rotation. We always put the farmer's rotation in it. These are full field trials with, you know, farmer equipment. And he had a disc grip chisel plow as his rotation. So you can see that there is absolutely no difference between soybean yields, which makes sense. Soybeans, boy, they can just, they take a lot of gruff and they just keep growing. And so here we're leaving with strip till 64% residue, and then each of them had a little bit lower down here. So you can have residue and keep yield. And I wish we could have put no-till in that plot. I don't think we had a good enough planter to do that. So there's just some things I can't always push in Minnesota. Tillage is king up here, and I'm just trying to get people to do strip till. But a lot of them, when they are into strip till, they actually go to no-till as well. No-till beans, strip till corn. This is in North Dakota. And remember, North Dakota is even colder than Minnesota. And what they found out of 17 site years is that 6% of the time, their beans did better if they did chisel plow. 18% of the time was strip till, but 76% of the time, and these studies did include no-till, beans didn't care what kind of tillage you had. They did not yield better or worse because you changed your tillage. Then we looked at the corn yields in west central Minnesota. Again, there was no difference, and it was actually kind of droughty during 10 through 12. And so our yields are a little bit lower than expected. And again, strip till kept more residue, so you can have more residue and still keep yield. And corn is more particular. So over in North Dakota, and we're only talking the eastern side of North Dakota. This isn't going on into the western side where it's much, much drier. 12% of the time chisel plow out yielded the other systems, 44% of the time strip till, and 44% of the time it didn't matter. It could even be no-till. And that's North Dakota. But what I found is that the weather plays much more of a role than what we do with our tillage. And so you can see here, this was 13 site years in southern Minnesota. The furthest north was a west central point in Morris. And what we found is no-till in the red and strip till in yellow. Gray is the field cultivation. In the spring, one field cultivation. And then there's chisel plow and with the field cultivation in the spring. And what we found is no-till was a little bit lower in yield. If you see here with the little asterisks here, it means statistically it was lower. Then in 2005, statistically, these were the same. Okay, and the reason why 2004 was a very cool wet year, 2005 was an awesome growing season. You could have done anything out there and had a wonderful yield. And again, here's your residue amounts. So you can be over 50% residue and still maintain yield. So in summary, I mean, less tillage means more soil structure, and that gives you a lot less erosion and better water infiltration and more water in droughty area at times because it will hold on to that water later on in the season, and less fuel and labor taking less passes out into the field. So now you'll have time to go do that honeydew list, you know, probably not, okay. And there's very little effect in the yield. And it creates a more resilient soil. And as what we've seen, we are getting such extremes now that soil needs to be able to bounce back. And Iowa and Minnesota have some of the best soils in the whole world. And I'm not just saying that because I'm biased towards us, but our deep black soils that we have, we don't want to lose them. We don't want them to blow away. We don't want them to wash away. We do help feed the world with those soils. So we want to keep them as good as we can. So the bottom line is, you're going to help manage this resource, really help out. You know, there's a lot of resources out there. There's kind of this big movement, and I don't think it's going away. I've seen fads come and go, and it usually takes about 5 years, but this one's staying. People are seeing results. And just like Doug was saying, he sees it. It may take you 3-4 years to get there and start building that soil structure. And as you go further north and it gets colder, it takes a little bit longer. You add cover crops to it, it will go faster as well. So, you know, you can also look at our Upper Midwest Tillage Guide that we created, and it has a lot of that information in there, and it has some costs and things like that in there. We use the Iowa State survey, custom rate survey. We're going to go to change that out with the Illinois one here pretty soon, sorry. And, but it's a pretty good resource if you want to know more about tillage. So also see me on Twitter. I haven't been out in the field as much this year, so I haven't posted as much on Twitter, but I'm there and love to see different things going through. Okay, so do we have any questions, or do I have any more time? Because I have a couple more photos.
If you want to share those photos, we'll give folks a chance to type in their questions. I do have a few, and then we'll get to those. Okay.
Every summer, except for this one, I go up in an airplane, and this is what we see from the air. You can see your tillage, your combining, planting, spraying, all of your wheel tracks stay there. And so if you can lessen this by having less tillage tracks, at least that'd be helpful. So that tillage is the diagonal there. the straight ones, it could either be the planter or the combine. It's always there. I see it all the time. Sometimes I have a really hard time finding fields that you can't find it in. So this one, every track you make out there, 80% of the compaction's happening on the first pass. So be really careful. Again, here's some more. And I mean, this one you can see where people were traveling, and they weren't traveling when the corner beans were up. They were traveling beforehand. You can see the diagonals of where they were coming through with something. You can see where carts turn around and go back to the entrance. Just, be really careful out there. So if you can back off the tillage, you'd have better soil structure, which would also help hold up the weight of equipment and let you be out there without creating such problems for the crop and the roots growing. Okay.
All right, so before we get to a couple questions for Doug in particular, Jodi here, there was a question about if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what is vertical till for those that aren't familiar with it.
Sure. Vertical till is using kind of like a coulter cart. So they could be either wavy, they're not discs. Discs have a curve to them. There's more straight. They can either be wavy or fluted. And so they go through the soil more at a straight angle. You can angle them out. And if you take the gang and angle it and go through the soil, you do a little bit more structural damage. So they're usually on gangs, although they can be individually mounted. They usually only go 1 to 3 inches deep. So they're really good at chopping up residue and incorporating it a little bit and getting the decomposition going. They are not good for taking out weeds, at least not if you're at a low angle. And they're not as good for incorporating urea.
All right. So Doug, if you want to go ahead and turn your camera on and unmute, there's been a couple questions for you. Welcome. So someone had a question specifically about your cover crop usage. How are you seeding them, terminating, and species that you're using?
Right now, in the last several years, we've been using 30 pounds of oats and 30 pounds of cereal rye. And then we've added some canola, a rape, I guess, and we get along okay that way. I think this year we're still going to try an aerial seed, even though Iowa State has cautioned against that. I think if you saw the residue that we've got there, when you seed with an airplane and that seed falls in that residue, it doesn't take a lot of moisture to really get that stuff started. So, there's all kinds of different mixes that you could use. Not one is right. It's whatever you think works best on your farm. And last year, I will have to say, probably the first near failure of a cover crop. The oats came up just fine, but it was so late and so cold, and there was so much cover to intercept the sunlight that the cereal rye had a hard time getting going. And then when we combined, it covered all that rye up, and they just didn't have enough to get through it. And in my corn stalks, first time it had ever happened that there really wasn't any cereal rye coming. Soybean ground had good cereal rye, which we killed up before we planted corn. But we usually let our rye come in the spring and plant into that green when it's about 6, 8, 10 inches tall, depending on when we get to it. We try to plant our beans before we do our corn.
And speaking of your rotation, are you strictly corn and soybeans, or do you raise any other crops?
No, we don't. We used to raise livestock years ago. Right now, we're strictly corn and beans, and that's why we think it's a really good idea to use cover crops in there to try and break that rotation up just a little bit more.
Jodi, this question's for you. If you have areas of your field that are typically wet, kind of like what you showed in that picture, will no-till help remediate that condition rather than tiling?
Excuse me.
No, go for it.
Well, they both have a place, and depending on how wet it is, but I could just give you one example. I had one hillside, it was probably a 10% slope or so, and my son said, boy, we got to do something with the rust out there. We're getting a lot of erosion. I said, no, we'll just leave it. And it took about 10 years. And finally, one time when we were combining, the combine basically just kind of sank in the ground about 4 or 5 inches, which is totally unusual. And we finally figured out what had happened. There was a natural shallow hard pan there. And as time went along with no-till and then planting cover crops, it finally broke through that hard pan. And ever since that time, that ground is straightened out and farms just like everything else now. So it just all depends where your hard pan is. I know cover crops, the right cover crops in a situation like that can really help.
Also, if you're doing a lot of tillage, your tile drainage is, you know, when it rains and it gets to the top of the soil, if you're prone to crusting, so you have very poor structure on the surface, then that water never makes it down to the tile drain to get taken out. So cover crops definitely help do that. So does soil structure, it gets it into the soil. Now, if you have places like side hill seeps, or, you know, some areas that landscape wise, you really just need to tile drain, it does help set you up to be more successful in any type of farming. We do tile drain up here. I'm not as fond of the pattern tile. I'd rather see it done on landscape where your spots are really bad, and then take that water off. It lets you get into that field so that you can try no-till and some of these other practices. It gives you a little bit more confidence to be out there. We own the land around us, and we're tiling because we want our renter to keep trying new things. And yeah, I do agree with tile for a while. Now, there's also some people, I don't know about you, Doug, but 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the line, they really don't need that tile because their soil's doing really well.
The only place we have tile really we have some terraces that are tile drained, and then along waterways, and then along, I would say major waterways or where the water would tend to accumulate, there might be a tile run through there. Otherwise, we don't have a lot of no pattern tile actually.
So, and this could be, we'll take Doug first, and then maybe Jodi with your renter if you've had any experience. Have you noticed any changes in the soil itself when it comes to like timing? How is it compared to some of your neighbors using conventional tillage in terms of getting in for planting or possibly getting in for harvest? How your soil structure impacts the timing that you're able to do your field exercises?
One thing you'll notice about soil structure, and you'll notice this, 2 or 3 years in, the ground is apparently hard, although it's really not. It just got the natural firmness to the soil. It holds equipment much better. When we go ahead and plant, the ground is firm. The only thing, if you got a lot of residue on there, it's naturally going to be a little bit wetter, but that's what we want. It's not overly wet, it's just very damp, and we're able to plant in that and have very good crops.
Yeah, I agree with that. With all of our tillage ones, the very first year that you reduce your tillage to strip till or no-till, you'll see better water infiltration. You won't be seeing much changes in your soil structure till 3, 4, or 5 years, but that water infiltration is right away. And that's because the stalk, when it sticks up like that, is just a straw. It just lets the water in. And one of our farmers called and said, we just got 3 inches of rain. And I'm like, oh boy. And it was our first year of our trials there. And we went there, and I did not want to stand in the chisel plow. There's no way, or in the disc grip. But in the strip tills ones, yeah, it held my weight. I could walk through there and not get muddy. So think about your co-op, and after a big rain event, and you need them to come out and spray a field. Which fields do they go to first? The moldboard plow ones, the heavily tilled ones, chisel plow, no, they'll go to the mulch till, vertical till, ridge till, no till, and strip till fields. They'll go to the ones that they know they have better drainage.
So Doug, this one came in for you. Have you been doing any infiltration tests or working with anyone to do infiltration tests on your no-till cover crop areas?
I have not, but the only infiltration tests I guess I've really noticed are the rainfall ones we get. Then when you go out there and dig in the soil, it's a beautiful crumbly soil, and having the actual number, you know, it's going to be good because it's been no-till for a long time and the soil structure's there. I guess I just haven't really taken the time to do that.
That one picture that I showed where the rain had passed and it was double disked and strip till on one side, the double disc, they did ones out there, and they would take in about a ½ inch of rain an hour. Whereas the strip till side, even starting on the first year, was taking in 2.5 to 3 inches an hour. So it's, and if you talk to other farmers, every one of them will say that they have less runoff and less ponding and things like that. And to me, it's hard to put a monetary value on it every year, but it's invaluable.
So I know Doug mentioned taking a spade or a shovel out to his field to check things out. Are there other kind of easy to do farmer can take a look at outside of sending maybe a soil sample into a lab that you think would be a beneficial way of comparing kind of how their soil is doing?
Yeah, a lot of wormholes or actual physical presence of worms, that helps. They really help get rid of the residue. You can see standing corn stalks. My fields now, you can't even hardly find a standing corn stalk. It's just gone. And by the time fall gets around, there's nothing there. And we don't have a problem with residue because it's either the microbes get it or the worms get it or both. The only trouble the last 2 years, it's been so dry, I think the worms have probably gone deeper than I've noticed them in the last several years. So that's one thing. You know, usually when you dig up a chunk, it's just covered with wormholes. And this year I haven't noticed that too much just because it's been so dry.
Yeah, and I would say looking at the physical aspect of your soil, first thing is if you go out to a field and you see erosion, don't worry about a Haney test or any other test. You need to stop erosion. And the way that you stop erosion is reducing tillage and putting in a cover crop. Keeping the soil covered with brown or green as long as you can is the best bet there. So if you go out with a shovel and like Doug said, you look for soil that's starting to cling together. Pull up a plant and you'll see on the roots that there's little clumps of soil. Those are aggregates. So the more that you see of those, the better off your soil is doing. As you go deeper in your soil, you won't see that coffee ground or coffee cake structure that they talk about. It's going to get chunkier. So be aware that there's natural things in soil happening. 6 inches of soil in an acre weigh 2 million pounds. So to keep that granular, beautiful structure, it's not going to happen. But also visit people as they do soil pits. Come up to Minnesota. I'm doing one in a couple of weeks. We're going to compare uphill and downhill to show you how much soil has moved over the years. So it's, yeah, just feeling it and being with it, it teaches you a lot of different things about it.
So speaking of soil structure and those different kind of layers that you find, are there any issues with nutrient stratification when using no-till?
Would you repeat that, please?
Any issues with your nutrients stratifying within the soil profile because of not doing any incorporation?
I'm sure there is, but when you do the same thing over 15 years, that fertilizer slowly works its way into the ground. And after all, most of the roots are in the top 2 inches anyway, and that's where most of the soil is. So they're able to get that, and what goes on past, the other roots can pick up as well. So I would say, yes, there probably is
I just don't worry about
And I work mainly with strip till systems, and so we band apply the fertilizer, and so we know it's underground and not. I've seen data on no-till with stratification, and the fertility specialists at NDSU and U of M both say it's not worth, it's not a huge concern. It does stratify, but your roots are there to get it.
Unmute myself here. Last call for any questions in the chat box. And while anyone's typing those in, I'm going to share my screen one more time. For those of you, and I'll share this in the chat as well, that attended for CEU credits, please send me an email by 5 o'clock today with the following information. Again, I'll send my email through the chat so you can capture it there as well. And I want to invite everyone to join us in a couple weeks on September 10th. We'll be hosting a Redefining the Field Edge, so taking some of those portions of the field that are notoriously low performing, typically wet areas, and seeding them to perennial vegetation. So join us then to learn a little bit more about that project. And it looks like we've got a couple more questions that came in. This one's for Jodi. In Minnesota, you say, would you say that your SWCDs are encouraging the soil structure message?
Very much. In the last 5 years, they have really gotten trained. I used to be kind of the only person talking about soil structure, and it's just been phenomenal to have all these counties now to work with. The NRCS, the soil and water, watershed groups, SFA, well, anything with an acronym seems to be understanding the value of soil structure now. So that's been great.
And then you mentioned that you're banding in for strip till nutrients. Where do you sample for your strip till to know that?
Yeah, that's always a good one, isn't it? Usually 6 inches to side, 6 inches down. And you got, you know where those strips are. It's pretty easy to get them, and you'll just need a little bit more sampling, so that, in more spots that you're sampling in, so that you just get a better feel for what's going on.
All right, last one here. You had an animation, Jodi, of the infiltration comparison under no-till and corn from data. Was that data modeling or theoretical?
That one was theoretical. It was from Arizona State. They had one with residue, but I couldn't get it to clip right. So that's the only reason why I showed that one. It was a little bit better clip. And of course, your residue is going to be thinner, and the roots are going to be a different shape than that big, huge chunk that they had in there. But it was mainly to show you that when you have that lighter bulk density, like residue and roots, it really can get that water down.
All right, well, thank you very much. You can search Jodi on the internet there if you have follow-up questions, and you can reach out to me via that email too, and I can possibly pass on questions to Doug if you have more questions for Doug as well. So thank you all so much for attending today, and keep an eye on your email inbox for that evaluation, and join us again on September 10th, 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.